This is Tessa Keogh, and as promised, we have a bonus video this week. After watching Russ Worthington's video about how he uses his research log with his family treemaker program, I opened up Legacy and started playing. As I mentioned, oftentimes I read or listen to another genealogist explain how they do something, and then I see how I do it in Legacy. So I opened up my program and picked one of my Murphy ancestors to find an unsupported fact or event. I don't know about you, but I have lots of those. Now, the reason I selected the Murphy ancestors is that we were originally told, and this story is contained in one of our family remembrances, and I've seen it written up a couple times on the ancestry trees. In any event, we were told that James Murphy left Ireland for America in the company of an unrelated Michael Murphy, and that they were friends. They arrived sometime in the 1850s or the 1860s, and both Murphys ended up in Nebraska by 1870, although in different parts and by different routes. Now, for two friends to come from Ireland to the United States, how much sense does that make that they'd split up? Another story has James Murphy leaving Ireland for America with his niece Mary and two of his nephews, James and Lawrence, again in the 1860s. Now, the only problem with that story is that James Murphy arrived in America, married in Illinois, and was already homesteading in Nebraska at the same time he was supposedly coming to America with those three siblings. 2 years ago, I visited Nara and examined the homestead documents. Then I found a website that had obituaries from Nebraska newspapers and did some additional research. So, before we get too far into my story, let's meet the cast of characters. James Joseph Murphy is my second great-grandfather. He was born in Ireland to Patrick Murphy and Mary McCabe. As you can see, he arrived in the United States and he married in Nebraska in 1860. By 1867, James Murphy had 4 children, and he is making an application for a homestead in Johnson County, Nebraska. Now, those 3 siblings coming to America, they traveled with their uncle, or did they? James, Mary, and Lawrence Murphy, my James is their uncle, and the brother of Pierce Murphy, who stayed in Ireland. We have James Murphy, who married in Johnson County, Nebraska in 1883. We have Mary Murphy, and as you can see, she married John Byrne, and that was a name change to Burns, in Logan, Illinois in 1868. And rounding out the siblings is Lawrence Murphy, the youngest sibling to make the trip, and his obituary provides the immigration details. All the players settle in Johnson County, Nebraska, where they farm and or teach, in Vesta, St. Mary, and or Tecumseh, and they all have large families of Murphys and Burns who continue that tradition. Now, Lawrence's obituary lists his parents, Pierce and Anna Murphy, lists when and where he was born, May 1844 in County Carlow, Ireland, the number of siblings, 6 brothers and 2 sisters, where he attended school in Ireland, and when and with whom he emigrated. It says April 1866 with his brother James Murphy and John Burns. The following year they reached Illinois with his sister Mary, and where he settled, Nebraska, and how he was employed. He taught school. Now, there's lots of information in the obituary to check to either prove or disprove. Now, a search on Ancestry.com with Lawrence Murphy, born in 1844 in Ireland and arriving in the United States in 1866, brings up this result. And I've pointed out with arrows 4 things you're going to want to take a look at. The first is the information I put in for the search. Lawrence Murphy, born around 1844, arriving around 1866, and he'd have to be coming from either Cove or England. Now, this information brings up my search results. I can view the passenger list, and that's referenced over on the right-hand side. I can also search the ship database and find out more about the ship that this Lawrence Murphy traveled on. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, when you take a look at the source citation and the source information, be sure to read about the sources that you're working with so that you know what's included and what's not included. And in fact, I looked up information about the New York passenger lists 1820 to 1957 because this is the information I was going to be looking at. And it tells you a little bit about the database. It tells you depending on time, where the person would have arrived at Castle Garden, Ellis Island, or some other place. It also tells you the kinds of information you might be able to find in the index, and it gives you tips for using the collection. It also provides you with some additional information to read, and in this case, one of those items is John Coletta's book, They Came in Ships. I think it's always important when you're doing research that you just don't limit yourself to that particular record, but you try to get a feel for the entire history of the time and maps and the types of things you're looking for. So after I've read through that, and I've also put a hold on that book at the library, I move on to the record. In this instance, Ancestry.com, we have the New York passenger lists for 1820 to 1957. And I can see right at the outset, although the page is kind of crumpled up, that this is the ship's manifest for the Queen at the Port of New York, and it has an arrival date of May 2nd, 1866. Now my first question is, I wonder when it left Liverpool, and I wonder how long the trip was and what was involved in the trip. But I digress. We're going to be looking for the page in particular that the result shows up on. And what I'll tell you is I went to that page first, and then I worked my way backward to find the start page for the manifest and the ending page. A lot of times they have interesting information, births, deaths, number of crew members, that type of thing. So we take a look at the results page, and what do we find? There indeed, and item 674 on this page lists Lawrence Murphy, age 21, male, laborer, leaving from England, going to the United States, and traveling in steerage. And you'll notice the two individuals above him are James Murphy, age 28, and John Byrne, age 30. Now, I looked through the rest of the document, numerous pages, and I did not find a Mary Murphy on this ship. Now, I also had the opportunity to look up information about the ship, and that's done right from Ancestry. And interestingly enough, it takes you to Norway Heritage. This is a great site, and I've given the website or the link for that. I was able to find information about my Norwegian ancestors as well on this site. It lists a lot of information about the ships, about the costs involved, the time, the travel stories and remembrances, has a number of great links. But one of the things that they did early on was transcribe manifests so that you don't have to read and try and find information all the time. So Norway Heritage is a great site. In this instance, we're able to find a little bit of information about the ship. The name is the Queen. It's owned by the National Line. It's a steamship built in 1865. It tells you where it was built and who owned it. It also gives you a little bit more information about the ship, and you can see that in the links, both the history of the ship and the history of the National Steam Line. And there's a larger image of the ship, and this is done from a stamp. The Queen was built in 1865. She was 381 feet by 42 feet, and that's about the length of a football field, including the end zones, and about a third of the width of a football field. So to give you a sense of the size of the ship. She was classed as a clipper with 1 funnel and 3 masts. And then I went even further because I wanted to find out a little bit of information about where these ships would have come in and maybe what the immigrants would have faced when they got off the ship. And this is a copy from the pocket edition of the Merchants and Shippers Guide Map to the Port of New York. And this is simply an image, and as you can see from the arrow, this is where the National Line would have come in, right here, and it's right beside the Cunard Line. and the Williams and Guion lines. And these are all coming from Liverpool for the most part. So all of these ship lines are coming in here. And the thing that I find amazing, and to give you a sense of where you are, this is Ellis Island and Governor's Island at the time. But this is the Port of New York, and this is how busy it would have been. And then anyone who's getting off of these ships would have been trying to figure out how they're going to get to the railway lines, or find um, any kind of transportation that would take them if they knew somebody in New York, or if they were getting on trains to go to Chicago or elsewhere. So although this map itself is put together in 1879, and that's 13 years after Lawrence, James, and John arrive, it gives me a sense of the Murphys' arrival, what it would have looked like, where the ship docked, and how overwhelming and busy the Port of New York must have been for all of those new arrivals. It's also interesting how they would have continued their journey to Illinois and then later to Nebraska. And of course, that gives me more to research in the future. So now we are taking that information that I have learned by doing a little bit of research with Ancestry and then clicking through to other sites as well, and playing in my legacy database. And the first thing I'm going to do is just show you what I did again, and then perhaps we can go live. But this shows you that I have to-do items, and I put the to-do item in there. The category is immigration records. The locality is New York, and I always put the year first so that all of these items that are in my individual or group to-dos can be in date order. And basically it reads, research the arrival records. I'm looking for Mary Murphy, coming from Ireland to the United States. Everything I had seen before talked about 1867, although I noticed that her brothers come in 1866. So I put the task description in, and then you can also, and I know you're aware of this, it's open as of the date that you write up your to-do item. You can list the type that it is, whether it's research, correspondence, or something else. And you can give it a priority. I basically gave this a low priority. As you can see, I wrote it up originally in 2012. And then when I have some free time and it's the area that I'm researching, we move on from there. Now I wanted to show you that this is the to-do item and how it looks when it shows up. And then also anything that is got a asterisk beside it has had something filled in. This is my description that you saw just a few moments ago. I'm mentioning the fact that it's unverified information indicating when Mary came, who she came with, and the fact that I need to check to see if the year is correct, and that I'm going to need to look at Castle Garden because this is before Ellis Island arrivals, and I should be finding her hopefully with some additional Murphys. We now know, of course, that that's not the case. Now the results come in, and this was just done the other day. I said I started the research process in order to verify the information, but that I know that since the uncle, James Murphy, is already in both Illinois and later in Nebraska at this time, and he's homesteading and he has a family with 4 children, the chances are highly unlikely that he traveled back to Ireland to bring grown niece and nephews to this country. So I think that was some kind of an error there. What's interesting is that when you look at the obituaries for both Lawrence and James, they both state when they came to the United States and that they came with a friend of theirs, John Byrne. And in fact, when we go back and look at records, we realize they're all from County Carlow and they're all from the same parish as well. The final thing that seems to verify this is that Mary Murphy marries John Burns. In any event, I put the information in there that I looked it up on Ancestry and what I found, as well as the source citation information, so that until I've put it into Legacy, I do have that information. I've saved it in my shoebox on Ancestry and I can go back to it. Now this is the event that I entered into Legacy. I have the factor event being immigration. My description, I always list the country they came from and the country they arrived at. It's from Ireland to the United States of America, the date, and the place. And in the notes, I actually put in a lot of the information. I put information about the ship, how many passengers it would have had, and the approximate length of the trip. In this instance, the usual trip at that time lasted from 8 to 12 days. I have not seen the information from any kind of Liverpool or UK records about when the ship left, but I know when it docked in the United States. I also have the lines where the individual's information shows up, and I have abstracted that information. I also put a little bit of information in about the ship, anything else that I might want to put in there so that I could look it up later. I view this as all of my events and facts as just gathering all that information so that I can read through a chronology of events. So I'll be able to take a look at this and think about other things that I'm going to want to do. You can see my notes, and I'll also show you my source here. I'm going to want to continue searching for some additional documentation, naturalization paperwork, perhaps homestead or property records where they might mention where they came from and the time frame. I'm going to be looking at census entries to see how long they say they're in the United States or when they arrived, but always keeping in mind that the birth dates and the immigration dates tend to move around a bit. I might want to look at voting records because this will give me a few different indications of when they were naturalized, when they were voting, information about their property. This looks good, but it would be great to have additional confirming documentation. And finally, the assigned sources. As you can see here, it's the New York passenger list that I had just shown you, at Ancestry, the date I accessed it, the entry, and that information including the line number. So all of that information is in there, it's sourced, and that's what the entry would look like. Finally, when I go to an individual report, in this instance for Lawrence Murphy, you see that I have, first of all, information that it's arrival information because I don't know if he's actually immigrating at the outset, and so I put that information in there. And then I also have the immigration information. I have the citation, I have the information about the ship, what steerage involved. I also have the passenger rates that were involved and list Norway Heritage so that I can go back to that if I want to read it or if someone else wants to read more information about it. Now, this information is important to me because when I'm looking at an individual report, I can kind of preview it and print it a number of different ways, but I usually look at it either in an individual report or a family group report to see how the story is coming along so far, to look and see if there's additional research questions, and also to check possible holes in my research. Now, some fun facts are that in April 1866, which would have been the time frame when they left Ireland, coming to the United States, the Civil War actually ends for most southern states, and Andrew Johnson is president. Steerage aboard the Queen was $26 from Liverpool to New York. Now, to compare that or to get some kind of sense of what that involved, a factory worker in the United States earned approximately $10 a week at that time, and a private in the Union Army was paid $13 a month. Now, this is United States. These people are coming from Ireland, and so you do have to wonder at the time if this family had some money in order to be able to send 3 children over, or perhaps if the uncle who was already in the United States and homesteading had some money and he sent it back home. So I still need to find Mary Murphy's arrival in the United States. I need to find the naturalization documentation for my Murphys, and I'm sure there's plenty more questions that are going to pop up when I read through individual reports. Now, a couple things that I wanted to show you, and this is Lawrence Murphy that we've gotten to know a little bit, is I have my to-dos listed as 1866, research the arrival records for Lawrence. Now, as you can see, and we'll move this over here, I have the results that I think that I need. So I could mark this closed if I wanted to, but I would never get rid of my to-dos because this gives me a bit of a research log to always keep. At this point, I'm not going to worry about that. The one thing I did want to point out is that if you were going to be looking at any of these events, you could come here and you could see the information that I had in this report. We could scroll through it. I have a lot of information and you saw that in the report. But if I wanted to take a look at the report, what I would be doing is click on Report. You can go to Family Group Sheet and then you'd be picking the individual. And in this instance, because I have highlighted this person, I have Lawrence Murphy, the individual, for my report. If I wanted the family group record for the entire family, and that would include the marriage information, all of their children's information, I'd stick with the family report. And you're probably already familiar with descendant and pedigree, but this is where you'd come in for the individual report. Now you could include chronology pages. You're also going to want to take a look at your report options, because this is going to give you the ability to determine what you want to include, the format that you want to use, whether you want to include sources and pictures. And then also pay attention to the page setup, because this is going to be where you set up your margins and that type of information if you have headers or footers. So this is always something you can play with. And the thing that I'd encourage you to do is always preview your report, and you can do that right in the screen. When you're comfortable with your report, you could put it in a text file or a PDF file. We're going to just take a quick look at the preview of the report. You can also change the percentage that you're reading it at, but just to give you an idea of what the report looks like, you have this information in here. You can set it up to bullet your information or to number it. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can read it. But it puts the information together as an individual report for the individual. And you can see here is the immigration information that we had, as well as some additional information when I have this individual for anything like censuses. Now, if you were to go through this report, as you can see, and I'll go back here, I always put all of my census information in, and I abstract all of the information so that it's fully readable. I don't ever do anything like use abbreviations or something that's not complete, because I'd like somebody else reading the report to be able to figure out what I was writing. I put the source citation in the factor event, but I also source it, so you have that. It lists the children here, any kind of burial notes, research notes that you might have, and this is another good way to go through and clean something up afterwards, is to read your information. And then you're going to have any of your source citations here, and that's another thing you can do to take a look at information and see what you want to work with. You're going to have individual reports and family reports that are probably going to be the two types of reports that you use the most. So that's the bonus video for today, where I showed you how I found some individuals in arrival passenger manifests, how I put that information into a to-do list, which is like a research log in Legacy, how I worked with the documents and additional information that I found, how I put it into a fact or an event, sourced it, and how I took a look at it in an individual report. So I'd like to know how you go through your research effort, and why don't you share it right here in our Legacy Virtual Users group. So we'll see you next time with another Tuesday's tip.